Hey guys, how are all of you doing? Hope fine, and yes, this is the next part of Game of Shadow in Naruto world. Where I am in the Naruto world. I have a name that isn't mine and I have a really nerfed version of the gamer. Is that all? Am I forgetting something? Right, inventory. At that I received yet another disappointment. Let's start without any delay. I'm regretting all my life choices right now, I grumbled to myself as I looked between the scrolls and books that laid before me. All of them detailing as much as people could about how to create a genjutsu that did something specific. From how moving one's chakra one way or the other with certain hand seals would help with this or that, to what illusions could be created in certain ways and which had to be made another way. Don't be dramatic, Brat Anko said from the side where she was playing something with Shirakumo. Although, if you can't make it, I would admit it quickly. They'll be less angry that way. Way to alleviate the pressure, Anko, I grumbled, my eyes still scanning the texts in front of me to wring as much information as I could from them. I would need it, apparently. I thought this would be like elemental jutsu creation, damn it. Those at least followed several of the same principles of regular jutsu creation. But no, it had to be completely different. I'm trying to cram in the basics together with the advanced stuff in the same amount of time I estimated for just the latter. As I said. I'm still making it, I interrupted, as a grin formed on my face. And the smile had nothing happy about it, that I can guarantee. I already wanted to make that thing a genjutsu anyway. And with several kids' eyes on me. It's my moment to shine. I'll make this happen. Well, I, myself, can't wait to see what all this is about, honestly, she commented, and I froze. Did she expect me to put the genjutsu on her once it was done? Because I would refuse if that was the case. The void was exclusively reserved for enemies. Orochimaru levels of enemies, if I had any say in the matter. It was just. I still had nightmares, 3 years after the fact. Wow, that bad, huh? My sensei pointed out, obviously having picked up on how I felt on the matter. Guess I'll have to see what it does to whoever they want to cast it on. I blinked and turned to her, narrowing my eyes. As I did so, she smirked at me. So, she does know what this is for, but can't tell me. Then why even make it known? I shook my head and focused back on the texts. Doesn't matter. Nothing matters but making this genjutsu exist, I told myself. This was my way to try and avoid the crush. I had thought I had no power in the matter, that I would have to just make the best of that fucked up situation when it happened. Either that, or hope that the changes I had brought an actual, active way to try and help with that, maybe even stop it altogether. I would be damned if I didn't take the chance because it was difficult. That said, I thought to myself wryly. I think after this and the other project I'll lay off jutsu creation for a while. This is already a headache, I don't want to know how burned out I'll be when I'm done. My eyes then trailed to the side. Chakra points, 900/900. Cursed seal, first stage. I activated and couldn't help but let out a groan. Instantly, I felt 10 eyes on me, 2 from my teacher and 8 from my summon. I steadfastly ignored the attention as I forced my eyes to continue reading. You really are one insane son of a bitch, you know that. Anko told me, and there was a slight showing of some emotion there that I couldn't place. It was somewhere in between concern and anger, if I had to guess. Absolutely out of your mind, I tell you. I know. I growled between my teeth. But I don't want to put that part of my training on hold. Especially if my theory about this is going to be right in the end. I might actually need the mark to use this jutsu. You don't have to be the one to use it, you know. She pointed out, and I turned to stare at her, even as my blood continued burning inside me and my shoulder felt like it would fall off with the rest of my arm. The fact that I could even maintain conversation proved how much I had progressed. But I was still far from the smooth process that I wanted it to be. Maybe it would never be like that. I have to, if they really want this as soon as possible, I shot back, turning my eyes to the scrolls. I didn't actually manage to read much while under the effects of the mark, but that was part of the training I had set upon myself. Cursed seal, first stage has gone up a level. Thank God, I thought to myself as I saw the screen, as I did with every level. The change in the technique's effect wasn't that noticeable, but it was something, and any improvement was very much welcome. The sooner the thing stopped practically crippling me, the better. Chakra points, 588/900. And now it isn't burning through my chakra quick enough, I thought, my teeth grinding against one another. I kept alternating between looking at the numbers and trying to read the texts until my chakra levels were low enough. It was a pain in the ass to do too, like waiting for water to boil, but actually being inside the water. However, I couldn't even close the screen and ignore that while I worked, since I really didn't want to know what happened if my chakra points hit 0, especially using the cursed mark. My first guess was chakra exhaustion, which I knew was a thing and that was serious enough. But there was always the chance that the system made me different, and I didn't want to try and find out which option held true. Chakra points, 38/900. At that, I deactivated the skill with a sigh. Then I took a deep breath in and let it all out as I tried to relax my now tense muscles. It didn't take the lingering pain away, but it helped. I continued inhaling and exhaling slowly as I cleared my mind. Mad, I tell you, Anko said behind me, and I almost snapped something at her. I believe you, Shirakumo said back. In the end, I just sighed. Oh. I really want to spoil myself today, I mumbled as I looked at what I had to work with in the kitchen. I didn't know what yet, but I had already decided to make one of my favorite meals. The day had been a particularly tiring one, even though it held much the same stuff that all the others, genjutsu creation, studying and cursed mark training, with little more on the side. I half turned my head when I heard the door opening and closing. Naruto, I called as I started picking up ingredients. How is the training going? Last I had asked, a few days back, I had gotten a rant about Ibisu, a part that still followed canon, at least. So, I kind of expected more of that. Or, maybe, a rant about the pervy sage he might have encountered already. What I didn't expect was Naruto to walk in, sit at the table and look down at the wood without saying a single word. Naruto? I asked, leaving the things I had been picking up on the counter and walking towards him. Everything all right? I was getting a little concerned. A quiet Naruto was always bad, no matter what, and the look on his face told me that it had nothing to do with a prank. I found a new teacher, did I tell you? The blonde said, and his voice told me all that I needed to know. Hearing the usually bright and boisterous kid sound like he was dead inside was just wrong. No, you didn't, I replied, taking the seat in front of him. Did something happen? I asked this time, keeping my tone soft. He was teaching me about seals. Had some really fun ideas too, he told me, and for a second there, some of the life came back to him. It didn't last though, as he deflated a second later before continuing. But, we were in this training ground today and, he threw me off a cliff, he said, and I blinked. I knew that was what happened. And I had somewhat expected it to remain the same. But I'm so going to kick Jiraiya's ass, I growled internally as a scowl took over my face. I took a deep breath in to not take my annoyance out on Naruto. Why did he do that? Tell me something more, or so help me I'll go and kill the piece of. Everything was fine. Naruto interrupted, likely stopping me from actually going through with that threat. The more I thought about that situation, the more angry I got. That was my brother the motherfucker had thrown off a cliff. But he did it so that I could contact the Kyuubi, and use its power. I nodded slowly. I knew that Naruto was more affected by Kyuubi's presence inside himself than his canon counterpart. Likely because my parents had been killed by it, leaving me orphaned. I guess they are my parents too now, I thought wryly. The line between IG and myself got less and less clear as time passed. And how did it go? I asked hesitantly. After all, I wasn't too sure how to react when we got into these conversations. They hadn't actually been parents, after all. I met him, Naruto mumbled, blue eyes doing their very best to look at anything but me. He gave me chakra and I used these. Summoning jutsu, like yours, with the spiders once more. His tone regained some cheer, talking about something other than the Kyuubi, a spark that was quickly snuffed out again. And I summoned this big toad to get me out, but I still used the chakra, and I talked to it. I don't know what to think about that. Naruto, I said, calm and collected, because that's what he needed at the time. I did my best to suppress any lingering anger at the Toad Sage for the moment. I could pay him back later. I've told you. It doesn't matter what you have inside you. What matters is who you are and what you do. I know, but using its chakra, it felt so wrong, he replied, his voice cracking and stumbling over the words. It made me speak again, if only so that I couldn't see my own brother spiraling down to a terrible idea of some kind that would only make matters worse. It's still Kyuubi's chakra, not yours, I denied quickly and decisively. It's about time that you got a pro for keeping that shitty fox inside you, don't you think? I asked, earning a slight smile in return. Progress at last. That's what I thought too. At first Naruto nodded before his lips pressed together in a frown. But still. You said you met it, I interrupted, changing topics while I was at it. How did that happen? I knew how, of course. However, I still needed to ask that. It felt like a logical question to make, and I needed something to distract Naruto while I thought over his dilemma. Win-win. He blinked at the sudden shift before frowning. I appeared in a place. It was weird, kind of like a dream. I was in a sewer and, well, the Kyuubi was there, behind big bars. That was it. I think. Sounds like a mindscape, I muttered, and he turned to me, looking me in the eyes for the first time. I've been able to access a place like that for a while. Mine wasn't a sewer, but it's a manifestation of your mind, or something of the sort. Are you saying that my mind is a sewer? Naruto scowled at me, although the corner of his mouth twitched up slightly. Well, I wouldn't be surprised, I replied with a smirk that softened after a second. But it probably has something to do with the fox too. It can affect my mind. The blonde almost shouted, and I grimaced. Poor choice of words. Naruto, relax and listen to me, okay? I spoke softly and slowly, managing to calm down, at least a bit, the very distressed kid in front of me. Sometimes, I forget how young we all were. Moments like these reminded me of that. Remember how weird Sasuke was after the forest? I started, hoping that the Uchiha would forgive me for giving away both of our secrets. Yeah. What does that have to do with anything? Naruto asked with a frown. Well, Orochimaru marked him with a seal, and me too, I told him, pulling my shirt and showing him the 3 tomo surrounded by seals on my shoulder. Remember how I said I've been able to access it for a while? He nodded, hanging on to my every word. Well, after I was marked, I had a fake Orochimaru in my mindscape, together with something really weird, I explained. And they are still there, but the mindscape is still mine, and they have no control over me. Are you sure? I was almost insulted by the question, before I realized that he meant if I was sure the fox had no control over his mind. I'm sure, I reassured. Besides, you can change how your mindscape looks as much as you want. I changed mine quite a bit since I first entered. What's it like? I made it look like Konoha, actually, I told him with a smile. All that mapping and drawing was quite handy when I was doing that. I'm sure, he said, shaking his head. I was just happy that he was more relaxed now. So, don't worry about that, okay? I sighed, before standing up. Welp, I feel like drinking some tea to calm down. How about you? I offered, suddenly with a lot less appetite than I had before. Sure. Now, about that chakra, I started, not turning to look at him, since I was pretty sure he wouldn't be looking at me anyway. I don't care if you use it, Naruto. Especially if you need to. If you come back alive and whole, I could care less what you have to do for that to happen. And that was the absolute truth. Even if I didn't know that Kurama was somewhat good under all that hate. I couldn't care less if that helped my brother in all but blood stay alive. I know, but still. Naruto replied, clearly uncomfortable. Naruto, I interrupted firmly. This mark I'm telling you about, we can use it for power. It gives us a chakra boost and our techniques are stronger, but the power comes from Orochimaru, I explained slowly. Do you think I want to use the power that comes from that creep? Well, no, but. Exactly, I nodded. But I'm training to use it anyway. Because if it helps me deal with the snaky bastard, or if it helps me deal with a threat to anyone I care about, it's good enough for me to do so. In the end, it comes down to what you want to do, Naruto. So long as you are still you, I'm fine with anything you do. I know you would never use that thing's power for anything bad. IG. He mumbled, the sound of his voice coming out watery. I turned to smile at him and saw his eyes gleaming. Thank you. No, thank you, Naruto, I told him, drawing a wide-eyed look from the blonde. Thank you for inviting me to Ishiraku's all that time ago. Ha, he chuckled with a shaky smile. It's the food of the gods, believe it. Yeah, it really is, I agreed, grinning all the while. You know what, let's go to Ishiraku's. I feel like eating ramen right now. Hell yeah. You are the best, IG. He shouted, pulling me into a one-armed hug. You really are, he added, much softer this time. Oh. Yin release, Advanced Mirage LVL1. B-rank technique with which the user creates an illusion for their target to see. Hand seals 10. Consumption 38 chakra points per illusion. Yin release, Greater Mirage LVL1. A-rank technique with which the user creates an illusion for their target to see. Hand seals 20. Consumption 76 chakra points per illusion. That's a sharp increase in cost if I've ever seen one, I thought wryly as I looked at the new techniques in my skill list. On the other hand, they'll still go down to 1 chakra point if my guess is right. With a 2 and 4 consumption reduction per level, either they stop at 1 chakra point like the others did, or they reach 0, which I really doubt either. What do you think, brat? Anko asked, and I sighed before turning to give her an exasperated look. I think I'd work a lot better without you asking that question every hour or so, I shot back, more than a little annoyed. I know this is important. I really do. I think it's possible, okay? I'm working on it. I have to study much more to give an accurate time. This isn't important, my teacher said, suddenly serious. This is beyond important. This could end up with another World Shinobi War if things go wrong. I know. I shouted, brows furrowed and hands clenched into fists. I know. But that won't happen. Because I'll make this jutsu. Just shut up. With a sigh, I turned back to the scrolls and books. I still have to get around the issue of the sense of touch. A bit of muddling is fine, giving a fake sensation too, but taking it away is a little more complicated. It can get messed up really easily, I mumbled as I started reading, still talking but more to myself than to my teacher. And you constantly questioning, isn't helping. I trailed off then. My eyes unfocused as my concentration gathered solely on an idea that popped in my mind just then. Could that work? I thought as my eyes widened. Could it be that simple? Maybe, I decided then, my brows furrowing. Simple but not easy, I don't think. I mused, clicking my tongue and picking up an empty notebook that I was using to take notes. Flicking a few pages forward so that I had plenty of space to write on, I started writing my idea. I heard Anko saying something next to me, but I ignored her. I needed to note that down before it vanished from my mind. And, more importantly, I needed to check if it was possible and what I would need to do if it was. The first thing I needed to do was take out the sense of sight, I knew that much. It was also easy, even if it was noticeable as fuck and thus easily dispelled. Still, if my idea worked. The second was sound, which was equally as easy to achieve, and also less noticeable, sometimes, in the middle of a fight. Especially if one went about it slowly so that it was less obvious, kind of like the frog in boiling water. Smell and taste were even easier, honestly. They weren't very useful in a fight though, except maybe smell in very specific cases. However, for the goal of recreating the void, they were essential. The last, and the one that had been giving me headaches since I started, was the sense of touch. Messing with touch was a lot harder than doing so with any of the others. After all, as mentioned, there was a reason that pain broke most genjutsu. I paused. Is that all there is to the void? I wondered then, and my frown returned with a vengeance. I was sure that couldn't be it. The void felt like so much more than the loss of senses. There had to be something else that I needed to do for that. Be right back, I told Anko hastily and crossed my legs and closed my eyes and started meditating. Not so long afterwards, I was inside my mindscape. A second later, I found myself in a sitting position, floating around the fake Orochimaru and contemplating my mind's version of the void. What do you think, buddy? I asked casually, making my presence known to the shade. I had been masking it, which was really easy since I was basically God inside my mindscape. The only response I got was some babbling, to which I tilted my head. Had the void completely broken his mind? It hadn't even been a month yet. How short had my stay in it actually been if someone like Orochimaru was already completely out of it after so little time? It really doesn't help when one's senses are denied. Sense of time, is that a thing? What else would there be for me to negate? I thought my mind gears started to turn once again. Sense of balance. Sense of hunger. Sense of space. Is there something else I'm missing? I'll have to ask for that info. That might be the key. If not, how do I find out if I'm missing something? I turned my eyes to the shade. He is the only one to have truly experienced the void besides me, at least, as close to the void as this is, which I'm suddenly wondering if it's really accurate. Still, he is my only clue, I decided, taking a deep breath in and considering my second idea of the day. This one, contrary to the other, sounded like a really stupid, really dangerous idea. But, it also sounded like a necessary one and, more importantly, like something that would work. With a sigh, I created a room around the shade of Orochimaru. A pure white room with a bed, a window with white curtains and a sight of the endless void, to remind him of what awaited if he tried to mess with me. Everything else was just like the first room inside my mindscape, the room from the hospital in my past life. I had never been able to forget that, despite my memory losing track of almost everything else. Let's see if you still have anything resembling a mind in there, okay, buddy? I asked the shade, who was still babbling unintelligently like a baby, occasionally moving erratically. Opening the white door and stepping back outside in the void. Time to go back, I think, but first. I turned to the floating cube that was the room and started drawing intricate patterns over the outside walls. I had become proficient in that, after creating the cube that contained the purple flames. Besides that, I put a trigger in the door. It wouldn't open if the shade tried to get out. Instead, the whole thing would disappear and he would be left floating in the void once more. After a moment of thought, I added another feature. After an hour or so, the room would appear again around the shade. I needed him sane, if possible, so leaving the shade in the void for an extended period of time would be bad for my plans. It looked like a normal room from the inside. But it was just a nicer cell for the shade to be in. That was all there was to it. Now, let's investigate all these possible other senses that I have to work to make non-existent, I said as I willed myself outside the mindscape. This is a bad idea, Anko said, and I held back an irritated sigh. I had told her what I planned to do with the Orochimaru shade in my mind, her and everyone else that needed to know, including Hiruzen, Inoichi and Ibuki. The Hokage and the latter had been all for it once I gave all my reasons and my contingency plans to keep the thing under control. They had, however, demanded that my measures were actually as effective as I thought they were. That had led to the Yamanaka head quadruple checking everything in my mind once more. Some that I hadn't even touched, but I endured through the whole thing patiently. After all, I understood how worried they must have been about what I was doing. Eventually, they were all reassured that I wasn't doing something stupid. Everyone but Anko, that is. My sensei had been adamant that I was the biggest idiot on the planet for giving Orochimaru any room to do anything at all. She was biased due to bad experiences, I knew that much, but it still annoyed me that she had so little faith in what I could do. I had been the one to find the method to deal with the mark in the first place, for God's sake. However, she was worried too, and I knew that. It was the only reason I hadn't snapped at her so far. Anko, I said curtly. I was doing my best not to shout something mean at her already. I think I could be excused if I wasn't perfectly polite. I'm doing it and I'm being smart about it. I told people just in case something happened and it really was a bad idea. But I'm confident in my defenses and so is Inoichi. It's just. She tried to justify herself. I know I interrupted, my eyes moving to her and staring. However, this needs to be done well. The world literally could be depending on this, as you said. I can't take any chances. Now, if you excuse me. I need to study these. I finished signaling the books that I had gotten in the Shinobi library. Most of them weren't even from the Genjutsu section. Instead, I dove inside the Iorojutsu one, looking for anything I could find regarding senses. Now, the only thing I needed was to find how to affect everything with one single Genjutsu, and then I needed to find a way to add my little idea into the whole thing. Thus, I took out my notebook and started writing down everything that I found. Oh. Okay, so, this works, I nodded, looking down at what I had written. I was still working even while back at home. It was late into the night and I sat at the dining table, reading over all my ideas and deciding what seemed like it would work and what didn't. My first step in the process was to tackle all senses one at a time and see how I would go about taking it out. For that, I had precedents for several senses, like sight and hearing. Still, I had made new ones just in case. From there, I would then decide if it was possible to take all those little jutsu and combine them into one, or if I would need to work on something new that would nullify all senses. The latter option was much more difficult, but then again, combining several jutsu into one wasn't exactly easy either. Furthermore, there were many senses, which meant that there were more chances of one messing up another's chakra interference with the target's coils. In the end, I was fully expecting to have to start from scratch, but at least it was good practice with genjutsu creation if nothing else. This one looks like it would work, I think, I muttered, less sure with the one I had made to block the sense of smell. After all, that one was one I had to make from scratch. Granted, there were some genjutsu made to stop people from smelling and tasting certain things, mostly poisons. However, there weren't many that completely eradicated the senses. Moreover, I thought with a grimace, turning towards the ones I had made for things like the sense of balance and such. Those were completely uncharted territory, which made them a complete nightmare to get through. I still have to look over these, and I'm really not looking forward to it. With a tired sigh, I banged my head against the wood. The hit was nothing compared to what seemed to be a permanent headache I was dealing with. A sudden breeze made me sit straight up. However, the only thing my eyes caught was the box that now sat on top of my table and the note on top of it. Wonder if I'll ever catch sight of the root guys that come in to leave this stuff, I thought to myself with a wry smile. I wasn't actually trying though. I suspected that there was more than just speed to that trick though. Most likely some genjutsu that I could dispel with just a thought. However, it wasn't like I could constantly be casting genjutsu dissipation just waiting for them to. Wait, why can't I? I wondered with a frown. Yin release, genjutsu dissipation max. D-rank technique with which the user disrupts their own chakra flow to free themselves or others from genjutsu. Consumption 5 chakra points per use. Really can't be casting this constantly through the night. Or can I? I wondered. All the studying I had been doing regarding genjutsu came to my head. Yeah, maybe that could be possible. But that's for after I'm done with all this shit. Instead, I focused my mind on the package that was left for me. The note on top held a simple but rather surprising message. Any clothing preferences? I read, blinking several times, expecting the words to be different every time I opened my eyes. Shaking my head, I let out a wry smirk. Definitely not the kind of question I expected from Danza or his people. I mused as I opened the wooden box. Inside, I found equipment. Equipment that, unsurprisingly, was very much the same as the one I was already using. Ninja wires, kunai, shuriken, senbon, even a tanto. That last one was surprising, considering that I had stopped using mine after I got new ivory. The only truly new addition was a dark, leather belt with some metal contraptions that I quickly realized was meant to hold new ivory. So far, I had been carrying the sword across my lower back, using living thread on its string to wrap the thing around the blade and my hip so that it stayed in place. This, however, would do the same thing, except that I would only need to wrap the sword on its wire so that nothing would be cut, and that would be it. A very convenient gift, that was for sure. It saved me the trip to buy or ask for something like that to be made, something that I had been putting off for some time now. And that would have been it, if not for the second note inside the box. Everything is chakra conductive, I read this time, and a wide grin spread over my face. Sure, normal metals worked just fine for ninja tools, even when it was required to channel chakra on them with some jutsu, like sparkling shuriken, or chakra flow. But actual chakra conductive metal was much, much better at it. This was practically a buff to most of my techniques, actually. Can't wait to try out living thread and web sense with chakra conductive ninja wire that isn't new ivories. Wonder if there's any difference there, I thought eagerly before groaning and slumping down. But I still need to finish that genjutsu, damn it. That was when I noticed something else buried in the equipment. A scroll that I picked up with a curious look on my face. Taking a peek inside, my eyes opened as wide as they could. Yin Release, Bringer of Darkness, I read as the title. However, that wasn't the most important part. Oh, no. The important part was what lied beneath that. Created by Tobirama Senju. Thanks for the equipment, even if I can't use it for now, I mumbled, my eyes and most of my focus on the text in the scroll. The least I could do was show gratefulness. This had practically come out of nowhere, after all. Then I paused and looked over all the stuff on the table. Is Danza trying to cheer me up? I theorized then, feeling more than a little weirded out. It was kind of nice, though. Is he less of a shady bastard now for some reason, or is this another thing? I thought then, looking between the notes and the gear. My attention was then grabbed by the first note. Clothing, huh? I considered the question for a moment. I had considered asking the spiders for a silk outfit, but Kumohoshi had quickly disabused me of that idea. Something about me not doing enough for them to do something like that. Which got me thinking about what they even gained in the first place. When asked, however, the boss spider had remained mysteriously silent. Surprise me, I guess I replied out loud to the written question. I didn't have many preferences in outfit, really, and I doubted the guy would make me look ridiculous. I like the boots, I added then, because I really didn't like the sandals, even if I had been told of the reasons for their use. I hadn't liked them in my first life, and I didn't like them in the second. With a sigh, I took the box and moved it to my room before settling back on the genjutsu work. Especially since I now had to study the jutsu that Danza had provided for me and see what I could pick from that. I didn't notice until much later, but I didn't feel as annoyed anymore. Oh. So, you finally there, buddy? I asked, sitting on a white chair. In front of me was a person that instilled fear in civilians and ninja throughout the world, no matter their nation. Now, however, that same man sat there, in a chair much like mine, and stared back. There was no fear in his eyes, but there was no loathing either. "I am the shade of Orochimaru," replied. It had taken him a whole week to regain a semblance of sanity, but I could see his eyes still darting around every so often, his fingers twitching and his tongue passing over his lips. He was far from completely fine, that much I knew. "That's great, because I need some information," I nodded, going straight to the point. "What do you need?" he obediently asked. If I didn't know the fear of the void firsthand, I would have been surprised by his willingness. However, I did, and I also knew that he was very aware that he would be back in square one if he didn't comply with my demands. The void, the shade's whole body shivered at the word, like it did every time I brought it up. "I want to know your observations of it. Is this some kind of sick attempt at mockery?" he asked, and I smirked at him. "No, you are not the type. I investigated you well, you know." "I'm sure there's a reason for that," he mused to himself, and I was tempted to ask what the original he knew of me, at least before the mark was placed. Maybe he would even have real-time knowledge. Thoughts for later though. No, if he had real-time knowledge of Orochimaru, then Orochimaru had real-time knowledge of him. "Do you know what Orochimaru does and vice versa?" I asked, this time steel entering my voice and my back straightening. Evidently, he sensed danger, because I saw him visibly gulp. "We are not the same person anymore. I'm merely a projection of the real Orochimaru. He's not aware of me and I'm not aware of him. I don't even share most of his memories. My best guess is that he feared someone achieving what you have, in some way at least," he explained, and I frowned. The edges of the room slowly disappeared, revealing the void outside, and I saw his already white skin pale somehow, becoming almost translucent. The shade almost threw himself in the middle of the room, away from the disappearing walls, as if attempting to escape for as long as possible. It was for naught, obviously, since this was my mind and my will was absolute. If I wanted him in the void, he would be. It wasn't that I thought he was lying. What he said made enough sense for me to believe it. However, not using all my tools to make sure that he was truthful would just be stupid. So, I had to verify. "I swear!" he screamed, any semblance of calm he previously had disappeared, replaced with very obvious panic. "It's as I said. I'm not lying. Please." The begging was what told me that he was really telling the truth. I couldn't imagine Orochimaru ever begging for anything unless there was absolutely no choice, and even then, consequences had to be bad for that to happen. I knew though, that the void was about as bad as things could get. The room was restored to its previous pure white visage. The shade, however, stayed sitting in the middle of the room, shaking and muttering to himself. When I used my power over the minscape to eavesdrop, I found out that he was babbling incoherent sentences, most of which related to fear and the void. "Will you do that?" The shade spoke, breath catching in his throat as he did so. "With all my answers?" he asked, looking at me with unveiled fear. "It's not that I don't trust you," I said with a shrug. "It's just that I don't trust you." Next question. I stood up and walked up to him, picking him up by the neck of his clothing and bringing him right up to my face. I absolutely loved the complete power I held in my mindscape. "Do you remember anything that I should know?" I growled at him, willing my eyes to become little windows into the void. He tried to speak, only being capable of heaving due to the panic that filled him. I tilted my head to the side, letting my eyes return to normal. "I don't think so," he answered finally, and I narrowed my eyes at him, something that made him flinch. There's a group of people, they are trying to gather the tailed beasts, as far as I know. He blurted out and my eyes widened. I expected him to tell me something about the crush. That would have helped me prevent that shit show, maybe without even needing the void genjutsu. I didn't expect him to tell me about Akatsuki. Still, it was very useful information to relay to Hiruzen and some others. There'll be more talking about that. So, be sure to remember every single detail, I ordered him, getting a shaky nod as I let go of him. The crush is the main concern right now. I can worry about Akatsuki later, I thought with a sigh. Back to the first question, I restarted, sitting on the chair and messaging my forehead. I'm too young for all this shit. I need your observations of the void. It's a very peculiar type of hell, the one that you've managed to create, he told me, and I fought back a bitter laugh. I hadn't created it, after all. Simply copied. I know, I replied instead. But I still want a proper answer. Taking away all the senses of a person. Very creative, the shade started this time, sounding like someone appreciating a piece of art. Which was all sorts of fucked up, if anyone asked me. Especially considering how scared the man was of the void. Orochimaru was a weird bastard, that was for sure. It seems to be more than that though, he said, and I almost perked up. That was the part that interested me. There's nothing there, but there always seems to be something there. He muttered without making any sense at all. And still, I understood. What is that? I prodded. You made that, don't you know? He asked back with a raised eyebrow, apparently forgetting his fear of me for a second. I raised an eyebrow back at him and stared. In the end, he rolled his eyes. Well, my best guess is that the place, or thing, or whatever, messes with the senses once they are nullified. I seemed to see things that weren't really there. Heard things that weren't there. Felt things that weren't there. Although, I'm not sure if that's an effect of having no senses or if it's your doing, he explained, and I nodded. I hadn't heard or felt much in the void, but I had always seen this, lights in the emptiness. Now that he phrased it like that, I had to wonder if they had actually been there or if they were just a product of my sense-deprived mind. For the moment though, I now had to consider that, maybe, no senses was all there was to the void. Is that all? The shade asked when the silence stretched. If I was honest, I had kind of forgotten his existence as my mind got lost in plans and theories for the genjutsu. Which was funny, since I was already inside my mind. Yeah, thanks for that, snaky bastard, I replied, waving a hand dismissively. In a corner of the room appeared what I had decided would be his reward if he was helpful, which he had been, if not much. There laid a white desk with art supplies on top. Everything except for the paints was white too. Take that as a thank you. If you are good next time, I'll give you an instrument or something. Making sure that the things had like 3 layers of triggers in case he attempted anything, I disappeared from the mindscape and opened my eyes back outside. Oh. Did you test your other original techniques? Anko asked curiously as we walked through the forest of death. It was 2 weeks after my little chat with the Shade of Orochimaru and also a full month since I was given the task of creating the Void Genjutsu. I had several running ideas that I was working on as of that moment, and all of them looked both like they would work and like they wouldn't. That was why I was there that day, to test some of them and see if any of them looked like they would work. For the sake of my non-existent sleep schedule, I hoped they would. Not really, I answered my sensei's question with a shrug. But then again, they were much simpler jutsu. And I wasn't too worried about them failing, really. This time, it's much more serious. I need to make sure everything is perfect. Makes sense. She nodded. Anko was tense, that much I could tell. There were millions of reasons for her to be like that, really. There was the whole war thing looming over us, there was her own training to overcome the mark through the mindscape with the Yamanaka, and there was my now somewhat regular chats with the Shade that was both helping me with the Jutsu and with some other things. He might not have had most of the original's memories, but he was just as smart, if what I got to see was any indication. I was really glad that I was taking advantage of that now. All that didn't help Anko with her ingrained fear and hate of the man though. I couldn't worry about that though. I had more important things to worry about. Like the report I had given a week back about the Akatsuki directly to Hiruzen. Or, closer in time, the crush and my work to stop it. Speaking of which, I bit my thumb before going through a few hand seals and thrusting my hand down to the ground. A moment and a cloud of smoke later, Shirakumo stood before me, for once looking straight at me with her blue eyes. She knew what was in store for today. Me. I looked at her filled with apprehension instead of fondness. You sure about this, Shirakumo? I asked, for once, using her full name instead of the nickname I had given her. I can just ask one of the bigger spiders, or I could use it on one of the animals in the fore. No, the small spider denied, and I grimaced. I'll do it, she said stubbornly, and I gave her a pleading look. Goddamn night, I grumbled to myself, seeing that she wouldn't budge at all. The reason for my current state was that the small spider had offered to be my test subject for my genjutsu ideas. The little girl was adamant on improving her abysmal capabilities against the illusion arts and helping me with my project at the same time. Still, the last thing I wanted to do was to subject someone that didn't deserve it to the void. It'll just be a second and I'll dispel it myself afterwards, I promise. Both my summon and my sensei rolled their eyes at me. I looked at them feeling more than a little bitter. They didn't understand. Which I thought was very, very annoying, since Anko should know how serious this project was. She shouldn't be so easily dismissing it. With a sigh, I resigned myself. I wasn't hoping for my attempts to fail, but at least I hoped my summon wouldn't be traumatized for whatever short exposure she had to the void if they succeeded. With any luck, it would need more than a second to fully reach the traumatizing levels that the Shade of Orochimaru had been subjected to. Mentally preparing myself to cast a spell on Shirakumo almost as soon as the genjutsu was applied, I ran through my first prototype's hand seals. I saw the small white spider tense up once I was finished and had to do physical effort to not instantly make it stop. A second later, I put a finger between her eyes and cast genjutsu dissipation on her. You okay? I asked worriedly as I saw the spider look around. It kind of worked, she said, and I gulped. I couldn't see anything, nor hear or taste, but I could feel things just fine, and I could smell, even if only a little bit. Everything else was fine, I think. I sighed in relief when I realized, midway through her explanation, that she was, indeed, fine. Then, I narrowed my eyes at what she said and picked up the notebook I had brought with me, taking notes on what she said regarding that test. While doing that, I idly wondered why that hadn't become a skill. Even if it wasn't complete, the jutsu did do something, which should be enough to be considered a technique. Is it because I don't consider it a full technique? Might be, I thought to myself, still writing down what Shirakumo had said. Then, I started asking more pointed questions to get all the details right and to find out if there was something that she might not have thought was important. Nodding once that process was done, I looked through the other prototypes, seeing if there were any that I could already scratch out with the information on the first. I actually managed to reduce the list by one more with just that. With any luck, this process will be faster than just having to cast every single prototype I wished in my head. The second attempt unbalanced her, also working to take away her sense of time and even the one from the kinesthetic receptors that enabled her to feel her limb's position. However, all the main senses seemed to remain unaffected, which worried me a bit. Still, with new notes, I could scratch out many more attempts off the list. By the time I reached the sixth test, I had a much better idea of what I needed to do, even if none of the prototypes looked like it would work. After all, that one was the only one left on the list without a cross mark next to it due to the previous attempts. And still, I was fairly sure that it lacked some tweaks here and there, which sounded like an easy thing to correct but was anything but. I tensed up when I saw Shirakumo start shivering shortly after the genjutsu was placed on her. Immediately, I dispelled the technique and picked her up in my hands. The poor spider continued trembling between my fingers for a few seconds. I could only smell and taste, she replied to me, and I nodded, not really paying attention to that. I was more worried about what had affected her so much. I couldn't feel anything else, it was. I understand now, Ig, the little arachnid admitted in a whisper. No more tests for you, Shura, I told her, and she didn't protest or respond in any way. I'll ask one of the older spiders next time. Don't want to test some more? I saw your list, Bratanko pointed out next to me, and I almost snapped at her. You can cast them on me if you want, she offered, but I quickly shook my head. No, I'm good with the data I got right now. And besides, I already used most of my chakra. They use more than Greater Mirage, after all, I replied, feeling slightly relieved that I couldn't continue with that. Whoever the higher-ups wanted to be placed under the void, I hoped they would at least deserve it. For now though, I was almost done with it. The only thing left was to start working with the info I had gotten that day, make another list of prototypes with the failures corrected and test again. With any luck, that would be it. If not, I would have to repeat the process. At any rate, I was almost done with that project. Summoning was kind of weird. Why, one may wonder. The answer is, because the summoner more often than not doesn't know who they'll summon. One could try to call for one specific individual, but it wasn't a guaranteed thing that the one they wanted would appear. The jutsu was, in my opinion, kind of like asking for delivery but much quicker. Once cast, the contracted individuals that could be summoned with that amount of chakra got the message and they could choose if someone answered or not. When Kumohoshi explained that to me, I was very confused as to how they could decide in the split second it took for the jutsu to work its magic, but she said that for most of them, it was kind of an instinctual thing. Why this explanation? Because I was currently standing in the forest of death once more, a week after my genjutsu testing with Shirakumo, getting ready to try and summon someone to continue with that after having, hopefully, corrected all the mistakes and reworked the techniques. Kumohoshi had assured me just the day before that she would have someone ready for me to use as a test subject, and I just had to go for what the system had dubbed as an advanced spider. I didn't know where the name came from, but I had unlocked a bunch of them during my testing of the technique prior to my full-time delving into genjutsu creation. The so-called advanced spiders were the step behind the giant spiders, which were as big as Kumohoshi, if not nearly as strong, obviously. Advanced spiders were, however, fearsome warriors on par with those of bigger size. Many of them trained under the likes of Kumokan and Kumoiroi, with either blades on their limbs, that I still didn't know where they came from, or armor over their whole bodies. What they lacked in height and such, they more than made up for with skill. IG. Shirakumo broke me from my musings, making me roll my eyes up as if trying to see the white spider currently sitting on top of my head. Are you still spacing out? She asked, sounding positively unimpressed. Kind of, I admitted with a shrug, earning myself a huff and a pull on my hair. So, any idea of who will appear? Mother didn't tell me, she replied casually, almost making me trip on air even though I hadn't even been walking. Mother. She is Kumohoshi's daughter. I shook my head, clearing those thoughts from my mind. Well, let's find out then, I decided. About time. I was starting to wonder what I had even come for if you would just stand there. The little spider shot at me and I almost laughed. Because you like coming to visit, admit it, I teased. I couldn't help but chuckle as Shirakumo started sputtering denials. For now. I focused, running through the hand seals for summoning once more, this time pouring much more chakra in it than I needed for Shirakumo. In a cloud of smoke, a spider the size of a not-so-small room appeared in front of me, light brown with black beady eyes and blades on its front legs. Its remaining legs had spearhead-like ends that made every limb look like a weapon. The arachnid then seemed to twist its body from side to side, as if getting a feeling of its body after appearing in a different place. That wasn't my focus though. Aren't you the one I battled when I got the contract? I asked as a way of greeting, tilting my head to the side. I looked over the spider's body and tried to decide if my memory was right or not. I am, indeed, a male voice replied as the spider warrior gave me their equivalent of a nod, moving his body up and down while leaning it forward. Kumogiri, in case you didn't remember, IG Sata. Wow. Way to make me feel bad about forgetting your name, buddy, I replied wryly. HMPH, our summoner is a fool, Kumogiri. Shirakumo huffed from on top of me, making me give the bigger spider a half grin that I was almost sure he returned, at least in sentiment. He sure is, Princess Shirakumo. The now named Kumogiri agreed, although it sounded more like he was indulging a child than anything else. Princess, huh? I mused. Nah, Shira-chan sounds cuter. Well, Anko interrupted the chat with a sharp clap. Time to get to the testing, yeah. She pointed out and I nodded. I wanted to be done with this as much as she did, maybe more. That wasn't to say that my sensei had it easy. With each day that passed, she looked worse and worse. One would think that she was the one working non-stop. This made me wonder what she was going through as of late. Was she being pressured instead of me for this mission? Which is more, was Danza pressuring her? Because I knew that, at the very least, she knew about him, which wouldn't make it a stretch to say that she might have to deal with him too. The quickest way to help is to be done with this, I told myself, and it was true, as far as I knew. So, you ready, buddy? I asked Kumogiri, focusing on the task at hand. My hands opened my notebook as I gave a last read through the first prototype to test this time. I had all of them pretty much memorized to the letter at that point, but the last thing I wanted was to mix them up in a dumb mistake. I am, contractor, the spider replied, and I rolled my eyes. Every single one of them, I swear, I thought tiredly. Call me IG, please, I told him as I closed the notebook and set it on the ground. Here we go, buddy, I warned, and he took it as it was, apparently. His body stiffened, legs straightening and leaning down, as if he was about to receive a hit. Evidently, the spiders had taken Shirakumo's word for it. It was nice to see the void getting the respect it deserved, if only a bit. Once the first prototype was cast, I counted down a couple of seconds, paying careful attention to Kumogari's reaction. The large arachnid twitched here and there, once even twisting his whole body to the side. Eventually, I dispelled the technique from him. "A most unsettling technique you have there, contractor," he praised. My eyebrow twitched at the title. "A stubborn one, I see," I realized wryly. I could, however, still smell things, which isn't the intended effect, I was led to believe. "No, it isn't," I confirmed with a long sigh before I started my questioning about everything that he had experienced during those seconds. Picking the notebook once more, I started taking notes. Unfortunately, this time there weren't many prototypes to be scratched, mainly because the list was short after the first round of testing. "If I may," Contractor Kumogari started, and I withhold the need to smack him and tell him, once more, to call me IG. Is this why everyone was telling me to call them by their names? It feels really weird to be called titles of any kind, I thought to myself with a grimace. Wouldn't the genjutsu simply be dispelled? It is, after all, quite obvious. I know that. I nodded, my eyes still focused on the pages in front of them. But I have a theory to work around that. I also will make it as hard to notice as possible so it'll take longer to dispel. I'll leave it to you, then. I'm not, after all, very knowledgeable in genjutsu, Kumogari admitted easily, and I suddenly turned to him. Is there a branch of the Spider Clan that uses genjutsu? I asked, my eyes narrowing. Why wouldn't Kumohoshi mention that though? My mind questioned. However, the boss spider had already made it pretty clear that the clan wouldn't just bend over backwards for whatever I needed. So, maybe it was. There aren't. Or, at least, as far as I am aware. There might be an estranged branch of the clan that does, the spider replied calmly. Well, that's a pity, I said, hiding my disappointment. Now, on to the next one, if that's okay with you. I added in the end. After all, I knew how the void could affect people. I'm ready, contractor. And like that, I went through the shorter list, only having to cast 5 prototypes before all others were scratched out. All of them failed in this or that sense, but I had narrowed it down already. With this session, I was pretty sure that I could get the real deal done in a few days. Hell, I could even start working on making only one, I thought, looking over the notes I had taken. Brat, I'm liking that grin, Anko pointed out, and I felt Shirakumo start climbing down to my shoulder, probably to take a look at my face. Tell me everything, my sensei all but demanded. I think I'm almost done, at least with this part. I just need to work on one version, work on details, and then the second part of it, I said, licking my lower lip as a smile threatened to split my face in two. Almost done, I repeated, taking a pencil and starting to scribble down on a blank page. Brilliant, but scary, Anko muttered, earning an affirmative sound from Shirakumo and Kumogari. I ignored them. Oh. A month and a week, Brat, Anko informed me unnecessarily. It was approaching the time I had guesstimated about how long it would take me to make the jutsu. I could stretch it a bit, most probably, at most until 2 months passed. But that might be pushing it a little when I had said around 1 month. I looked over my notes on the one genjutsu that I had made through so much work. Nights working until late. Meals skipped more than once. Sacrificing time to myself. All that resulted in this one technique. You ready, Chief? I asked Kumohoshi, who had insisted on being the one the final testing was done on. Shirakumo had, apparently, told the boss spider that I wouldn't be using the final thing on anyone that wasn't an enemy, and the building-sized arachnid had decided that this was her one chance to experience the technique made by her contractor. I hated it. I absolutely despised how everyone seemed more curious than afraid of the technique I had made. The only one that really had any respect for the thing was Shirakumo and Kumogiri, who had felt the effect of the unfinished technique. This was the void I had emulated here. And even if they only had a vague idea of what it did, it should be enough. Moreover, knowing that it had affected the shade of Orochimaru as it did, how could they not have at least some healthy respect for it? It was the one thing I could admit that I agreed with the snake bastard about. The void shouldn't be underestimated. Iji Kumohoshi nodded imperiously, something that I didn't know how she managed to pull off in the body of a spider, but she did. I nodded back, swallowing, once more, my hesitation to cast the genjutsu on an ally. As I finished the series of hand seals, I saw the now familiar reaction in the huge spider. The stiffening was, however, accompanied by trembling this time, something that was very noticeable with the size of the spider clan head. And then I felt Shirakumo pull on my hair as her mother whimpered. Then she twitched, and just as I was about to dash on top of her to dispel the genjutsu, she let out an audible sigh in relief. Her legs gave out and she fell on the ground, making the earth under my feet tremble slightly. Shakily, the boss spider stood up once again. I apologize, I heard Kumohoshi breathe out. I have, evidently, underestimated and disrespected your technique to the extreme, Iji. Don't worry, Chief, I reassured. Even if her accepting it made me feel somewhat smug, it also left a bitter taste in my mouth. After all, I had made her experience the void. What did you make, Iji? Anko asked next to me, and I turned to see her looking between me and the boss spider. So, now you believe it's a serious thing, huh? I thought to myself. I could understand though. Something that could get that kind of reaction from someone like Kumohoshi was something to be taken as seriously as possible. A mortal reminder, I answered her, smiling grimly as the system screens appeared in front of me. New skill acquired, Yin release, mortal reminder LVL1. Quest complete, create a functional genjutsu. Reward. Plus stage of chakra control. I let a grin take over my expression as I read over the quest. Almost there, I thought, cracking my neck and turning to my notebook once more. I still needed to work on it. One last thing to add to the technique to take it to a completely new level. It would be another jutsu altogether. But first. Yin release, mortal reminder LVL1. A rank technique with which the user negates all the senses of their target. Hand seals 20. Consumption 95 chakra points. Plus creator bonus. What the hell is that? I thought, very disturbed by the creator bonus, if it could even be called that. It was the very first time that the system was corrupted in any way. The first time I couldn't even read something on the screens. I had, however, a very solid idea of what was hidden behind that unreadable piece of text. The jutsu had, after all, been based on something very particular. And that's all I need to know, honestly, I added in my mind. Now, about this, I would need to use a bit less chakra for this next part, or it'll be just plain crazy, I thought, looking over the details in the notebook and the calculations that sat next to them. And even if I make that work, I continued, scribbling on the pages as I started cutting corners here and there on the technique's chakra usage. I'll probably still need the mark, I grimaced at that realization. Cursed seal, first stage LVL 12. Sacrificing their own chakra, the user can access the well of chakra given by the seal at the cost of their own mind. Increases the efficacy of Jutsu by 60%. Consumption 18 chakra points every second. I need this maxed. Or that would be the ideal, but if I really get this second Jutsu done in a week, then I don't have enough time. But I can certainly try, I decided, grunting as I activated the seal and felt its corrupted chakra feel me. Turning to my arm, I saw the black lines extending under my short-sleeved shirt. I hadn't been able to see the mark's design before, what with my long sleeves and bandages. Now that most of my arms were exposed, I could distinguish it pretty well. Slowly, just like the burn that accompanied it, the lines branched out like lightning in the sky. Or, what were lightning scars called again? I mused through the now somewhat dulled pain the thing provoked me. It was still very annoying, but I was not the torture it had been before. Still, it left my body aching like a training session with Matogai, and the slightest movement made it worse. Which made me be incredibly grateful that I wasn't training physically anymore, now that I had to focus on Mortal Reminder and its much more scary counterpart. "Ig, are you alright?" Anko asked, and I turned to look at her, meeting concerned brown eyes. I wondered, for a second, how I looked to her. With the cursed seal's markings all over my body, probably grunting and groaning through the pain and sweating bullets, all the while still with a notebook in my hands and working. "We can take a break, you know." "I really can't," I replied, shaking my head. "Not now that I'm so close. And I'm sure I'll need the mark to cast it, so I need to train it while I work on this. I need to have it as under control as I possibly can. I can't fail." Her expression grew into a pained grimace that I ignored. I understood that she might have felt bad that someone as young as me was doing so much. Had to do so much. However, it was what it was, and I couldn't stop doing it just to make her feel better. There were more important things going on now. I would catch a break after the crush was no longer an issue and there wasn't a threat of world war hanging over my head. I felt Shirakumo climb on my lap and continue her way up my arm towards my shoulder. "We chose a commendable contractor, Kumoho," she said, her voice softer than usual. Those words felt like great praise, and I took them as such, a small smile growing on my face as I continued working. "Oh. Kabuto Yakushi." He didn't know how they realized what was up. He just knew that, one moment, he was waiting for Sajuka Chiha to get checked over for the mark, maybe even be hospitalized, and the next one he was surrounded by Anbu ninja from all sides. He hadn't even had time to react before he was thrown in a cell. Still, he could wait. Kabuto was sure that Orochimaru would find a way to free him during the invasion. So, he sat in his cell, refused to talk, and just let time pass by. The problem was that a month passed, and nothing happened. He admitted to himself that maybe it was a bit presumptuous to expect Orochimaru to come and help him. However, he knew that the Snake of the Sannin couldn't risk leaving the secrets in Kabuto's head in the hands of Konoha. Regardless of all that though, a month was the time that had been given for the finals of the Chunin exams, and a month had passed. Nothing had happened. There was no rescue, there wasn't even a battle, he was sure. After all, the invasion would have been noticed, even from his isolated cell. Still, Kabuto remained silent. Even through all the tortures that Ibuki Morino could cook up in that scarred head of his. The silver-haired boy had been trained by Danza and Orochimaru, nothing would make him crack, not even a Yamanaka. So he found himself in the interrogation room again. This time, there were no tools around him, just the metallic table with two chairs on opposite sides. Were they going to try to talk the secrets out of him? That was just sad, honestly. Had they run out of ideas so they would try to convince him to spill his guts willingly? They were delusional if that was the case. Onyx's eyes moved up as the door in front of him opened. He blinked, surprised, when in came none other than IG Sata, his ex-teammate. The younger boy looked, in a word, awful. There were bags under his eyes, he looked paler than usual, and his hair was even more of a mess. Did they think he was in on it? Kabuto considered. The other boy had been in his team too. And if Yoroi had been taken too and found to be guilty of anything, then IG would have been a suspect too. Why is he here though? I'm angry, Kabuto, the other boy said as a way of greeting. He let out a short and sharp chuckle as he sat, red eyes locking on his black ones. Very angry. Do you have any idea of what I've been through all this time? Sorry. You will be the scowl that had been there on IG's face vanished at those words. In its place, a grin started spreading. Oh, you will be. Kabuto felt his shoulders tense in preparation, just like they did before all the interrogations. They sent you to make me talk, he said, despite internally readying himself for anything. IG was no normal genin. He had learned that much after his time with the boy. Would he use lightning on him? It would be blunt and ineffective, but it was the only option that he could think of. Maybe poison. That would be laughable. I don't know if they are desperate or just stupid. IG didn't reply to that. Instead, he just laughed. A weary, low sound that made the hair on Kabuto's neck stand on end and a chill run down his spine. The younger boy leaned back on the metallic chair before snapping forward, his palms hitting the table making a loud sound. Kabuto didn't even blink at that. I know you are not scared, IG voiced calmly, and Kabuto allowed a smirk to show on his face. He wasn't wrong there, at least. You are not, for now. I'm not here to talk to you, Kabuto. I wanted to try but, honestly, I don't care enough to do that. Oh, you wound me, IG. Remember the good times we spent in the forest, he said mockingly. He wished he could have seen the Satter's face when he was told that he was a spy. Oh, shut up, IG replied with a roll of his eyes. You don't understand how an interrogation is supposed to go, do you? I'm supposed to talk, the silver-haired boy pointed out. Yeah. But you won't say anything useful unless I make you, he shot back. As I was saying, I don't care enough to spare you of what I had to prepare during this time. You see, I've been making something very special for you. Just for you. Ain't I nice? So, you prepared a new poison or something? I'm an Irionin. It'll do nothing to me. Another laugh escaped IG's mouth. This time, it sounded like he had found his comment really funny, which made Kabuto wonder how tired he really was. He sounded a little out of it, after all. Poison, that's a good one, the Satyr breathed out. No, he shook his index finger at Kabuto, like a parent would a disobedient child. No, what I made is a genjutsu, actually. The older boy, strapped to his metallic chair, stared. You kind of gave away your trick there, IG, he pointed out, baffled. Are you trying to bluff? He added with a frown. No, it's actually a genjutsu, IG confirmed, and all of Kabuto's knowledge in people reading told him that he was being 100% truthful. I can just dispel it now, you know. IG laughed once again, but where the first one had been tired and the second real laughter, this last one sounded a lot more malicious. Dispel it, you should have been a comedian, Kabuto, you really should have, Ig told him. It would have saved you from this, at least, he added as he stood up. See you in a bit, yeah. Hopefully you'll talk then. Keep dreaming, Kabuto said, bored of the satyr's attempt at intimidation. The boy clearly had a long way to go. Was Anko trying to train him? Was that what he was now? A training dummy? His focus was pulled as he saw Ig gulp, and soon lines spread over his pale skin from his shoulder. The cursed mark Kabuto recognized instantly. It was fitting, in a way, that someone that used so much lightning release got the markings that resembled that element in particular. Ready or not? The black-haired boy warned as he started running through hand seals. It was a long sequence, but that was all that Kabuto could make out before he finished. Then, everything disappeared. And when he said everything, he meant everything. There was absolutely nothing around him. No objects, no surfaces, no colors. And it wasn't only visually. Kabuto had stopped feeling the chair beneath him. Hell, he had stopped feeling the clothes on him. I can't even feel my own body, he thought, disturbed, just before something else grabbed his attention. Am I upside down? Or? I can't tell. Suddenly much less amused by the satyr's attempt at threatening, he focused inwardly to catch a feel of his chakra, which thankfully he could still feel. It seemed that there was something Ig couldn't block from him, at the very least. Easily, he caught every single anomaly inside his chakra network. He would give the younger boy credit though, it took him a few seconds to do so. However, in the end, it had all been useless. He started dispelling it without further ado. The sooner he escaped whatever this was, the better. Except, it turned out that his efforts were the ones that were in vain. Even after correcting every single thing, he could still feel nothing, hear nothing, taste nothing. Why can't I? He thought desperately, willing an arm that he couldn't feel to move, smack something, anything, and snap himself out of this genjutsu. It was for naught. Nothing changed and nothingness remained. But not for long. He started seeing things in the middle of the empty surroundings. However, Kabuto couldn't, for the life of him, describe anything he saw. Whispers reached his ears, despite there being nothing to hear. Unintelligible sounds that he couldn't catch any sort of meaning to. The moment everything came back was abrupt, but so very welcome. Kabuto felt his breathing come out ragged, erratic, his heart beating inside him, something he never thought he would miss. He looked down at his hands, specifically the one he had been trying to use. His wrist was bleeding, from what the cuffs had done to him when he, apparently, moved. Why hadn't the genjutsu been broken? How did you like your first 5 seconds in a hell of my own making, Kabuto? Ig asked, and only one thought crossed the spy's mind. 5 seconds. So, how about it? Will you talk, or do I have to put you back in there? The younger boy asked. What? What was that? Kabuto whimpered. That's a genjutsu of my own making. I call it wit's end. So, up for more, or will you talk now? I'm not talking, Kabuto gritted out with a snarl. Inside, however, he whimpered as he saw the black markings appear once more on the satyr's skin and his hands moving through seals. After all the monsters Kabuto had met in his life, some of which included Orochimaru, Danza and Sasori, he thought he would never be scared of anyone again. One gets over that fear of the strong eventually, after so much exposure. That had allowed him to laugh in the face of Ibuki Morino every time he came in to interrogate him. As if he stood a chance. Ig Sato, however, wasn't a strong person, not yet at least. IG Sata wasn't a monster either. No, he realized, IG Sata was in a league of his own. As he stared into those blood-red eyes, Kabuto Yakushi knew that what was in front of him was a demon. A creature that had come from the deepest, darkest and most disturbing pit of hell to drag him into it too. And as IG did just that, Kabuto tried to scream. He couldn't hear it though, because there was nothing to hear. Nothing to see. Nothing to feel. There was nothing. That seems like a bad idea, the shade of Orochimaru in my mind mused, a frown on his face as I tried to get him to tell me if what Kabuto had told me after his second stay in my personally created void was true. This had been Hiruzen's idea, although I was sure half the reason I was sent to do this was so that I would go away and he could hold his meeting with Mai and Onaki. I know, right? I nodded, with a scowl of my own. It wasn't that Kabuto had said something that I didn't know. It was that he had said exactly what I knew. Now, many would think that was fine, that it was good even, but they would be wrong. Kabuto hadn't babbled all the details, but that was only because he didn't know all the details. Orochimaru was many things, one of which was a paranoid bastard, that was for sure. Still, the spy, now reduced to a babbling mess in a cell somewhere, probably still recovering from his experience, had, as stated, told us all about the things I already knew about the crush. That was all sorts of wrong, mainly because canon had long since flown out the window, and this wasn't me expecting butterflies to appear at every corner. No, this was me knowing there would be a butterfly somewhere in the invasion. After all, the mist and the stone were in Konoha now. If that didn't merit a slight change in Orochimaru's plans, I didn't know what would. There had to be an addition somewhere, something that would go differently. The plan that I knew had only worked because Orochimaru had impersonated the Kazekage, which was the only Kage other than Hiruzen to be present. Now, however, there were two others there. The snake bastard couldn't be so sure that Onaki would side with him, could he? Was the Sushikage already on his side? I hated that I didn't know the answer to either question. That was why I was slightly relieved that the Shade agreed that it wasn't an ideal plan. I fed the thing as much information about the situation as I could. Yes, even my folk knowledge, although I hadn't told him where I had gotten that information from. I wasn't pulling any punches with this shit. Speaking of which, I thought, my eyes narrowing in the Shade's direction. He must have sensed my gaze or something of the sort, because he instantly grew tense. He could try to tell on me with Inoichi during the checkups, if only just to screw me over, since I'm opposing his real self or whatever. I considered for a moment, my mind running through options. I could just tell the higher-ups that I had to throw him back in the void after I was done bouncing ideas off of him. They would easily believe me if I said that the thing had tried to mess with me in some way. It was a very Orochimaru thing to do, after all. However, I didn't want to lose such a useful tool. After all, it was like having two minds to think with, and everyone knows what they say about two heads. Still, the problem remained. I could place a trigger on him, send him straight to the void if he tries to speak of this. Otherized. But that would be too obvious. Inoichi would suspect something, even if only a bit. I don't think they would believe it if I said it was a trigger for him doing something bad. He wouldn't dare do that with Inoichi in the mindscape. No, I need something that would make it seem like nothing happened. To silence him without anyone knowing. I mused, the gears in my mind turning. Have I displeased you in any way? The Shade asked, unaware of the thoughts that I was going through, but obviously picking up that I was less than pleased with him, not that he had given me a reason. But just going by who he was, or who he was a shard of. At least, I distrusted everything he did and said. Because I swear that what we've discussed regarding this invasion is the truth, he voiced adamantly, and I believed him. If there was anyone that knew the true horror of the void besides me, it was him, with Kabuto running for third place. It didn't make me trust that he would behave. I could have not told him my extra knowledge, I knew. However, the last thing I wanted to happen was for Konoha to suffer because I hadn't wanted to risk it. There was too much at risk for me to not use everything that I had to my advantage. So I continued my planning while also ignoring the Shade's nervous words. I need to silence him and make him disappear, but without Inoichi being able to pick up on that, which is the hard part, obviously. It's not like I can replace him with a clone, I thought, frowning as an idea formed in my mind. It can't be that simple, can it? I wondered. I stood up as the idea grew and grew. It was very simple, and yet, I had never, in the years that I had had with the mindscape at my disposition, thought to do that. Which was understandable, since I had barely touched it after unlocking it, occasionally half-heartedly working on it, until Orochimaru came around. My brow furrowed as I focused my mind on one simple task. Creating a copy of Orochimaru's shade. One that I would control. The tricky part was that I had never created something that had life. I had made moving things, stuff that was triggered by some action or another. But I had never tried to create an animal, much less a person. And yet, why shouldn't I be able to? I thought, determination filling me. After all, I had recreated the void in the real world. Why couldn't I create a semblance of life in my own mind? Emphasis on semblance though, since I wasn't crazy enough to think that I could actually create life. Although crazier things had happened in the Naruto world, I would still steer clear of that one. Slowly, the shape of the shade formed inside the white room. I heard, from my side, said Shade making a strange sound between a groan and an exclamation. I ignored him again as I tried to give the thing as much detail as I could, occasionally turning towards the original one to check that I was making them look exactly the same. You are not trying to do what I think you are, right? The Shade asked, making my eyebrow twitch. Because if so. Shut up. I grinned. That hadn't come from me. It hadn't even been my voice. No, it was Orochimaru's, coming right from my recently created fake shade. The number of fake Orochimaru were growing disturbingly quick. That had been done surprisingly easily too, but that was because I gave the fake shade. I'll call you Hakai. I named my creation, mainly to avoid confusing, headache-inducing thoughts. I also made him nod after my speech, but I was basically micromanaging everything Hakai did for now. The interruption of the shade had been done with a simple trigger of saying shut up whenever the shade said anything. I would have to put a lot more triggers on it so that it would behave like the actual thing. I didn't have confidence in acting as two people with someone like Inoichi. I could already foresee lots of nights working on these before my next checkup with the Yamanaka head. And I still have to work on those elemental jutsu, fuck it all. You sure creating another me is a good idea, IG? The shade asked me with a raised eyebrow, visibly skeptical. The fact that you are arguing about this almost makes me think it is, Shade, my buddy, I told him with a grin that Hakai mirrored at my command. His, however, I made much more unsettling, just like the real Orochimaru's. Besides, this one will be under my control, I added. And that's why it'll be more dangerous. Because you think it'll be under your control, Shade pointed out, making me pause. He did have a point there. There was a reason why people feared AIS. And what I was trying to do was basically to create an Orochimaru AI inside my own mind. That does sound extremely dangerous. Or it would be, if this place wasn't completely under my control, I reassured myself. I could place as many restraints in Hakai as I wanted. He would be unable to do anything other than what I wanted him to do. And if he tried anything funny, he would vanish, as if he had never been there. And that's it. How to get it to act like a real person though? I mused, pushing aside my resolved thoughts on artificial intelligence. How I miss the copy and pass, tear. My head turned slightly towards the shade, who was eyeing Hakai almost fearfully. I had found during all that time that I couldn't really affect the shade in any way. I could attack him externally with my infinite powers over my mindscape, but I couldn't attack his being. I couldn't control his presence, or mind, or whatever it was called like I could everything else in my mind. But, maybe I can copy it. I concentrated once more and decided to pull off something that Inoichi would probably classify as impossible. Of all the strange things that I could do that made people call me a genius, my powers inside my mindscape were the only ones that didn't have a level attached to them. All my fighting prowess could be explained with skills in the system. This, however, was something that was all me, unless the inner strength perk or the meditation skill had an effect on it and didn't tell me. So, that was, maybe, why I was so confident when it involved doing stuff in the mindscape. A smirk grew on my face when I saw Hakai's eyes move on their own. Then his neck gave an awkward twitch. And, finally, he came to life completely, with a smooth movement that anybody could do. He turned to look at Shade, regarding his doppelganger thoughtfully. Then, he turned to me and he smiled. It wasn't a sadic smile though, nor a malicious one or anything that I would have ever associated with Orochimaru. It was actually a kind smile, which was just plain weird in that face. Well, can't say that my tampering isn't showing, I thought, with a quickly widening smirk. It seemed that despite how impervious to my control the shade was, I could still copy it with but a thought. After throwing that consciousness inside Hakai, I had quickly set out to place all the restrictions I could think of. After that, I started adding even more stuff. Hakai would be loyal to me and only me. He would always have my best interest in mine and of those I cared about. I was careful though, to add that he couldn't do anything without me knowing and allowing it, just in case he decided that my best interest was something that I didn't want to happen. I also made him unable to do anything manipulative regarding me or anyone I cared about. He would be the definition of straightforward with me. There would be no lies, no half-truths of any kind. That was just the start though. I had placed any and all rules that I could think of to cover my back. I also placed triggers all over him that if he tried to break any of the rules I set, he would be deactivated, for lack of a better word. Creator Hakai said, and I shared a smirk with him. Hakai, pleasure to meet you, I greeted him with a wave. You know your job. Act the part in case the shade ever decides to compromise any of the secrets you've shared with him, he said automatically, giving his original a grin that was much more suited to Orochimaru's face. And he isn't nervous that you are actually making a bad decision. I'm reasonably sure that he is just afraid I'll make him useless to you and you'll throw him back into the void, he informed me, and it was my turn to face the shade with a grin. Don't you worry, Shade. I'll still have use for you here. After all, you have a mind untampered by me. Hakai wouldn't be as accurate if I'm trying to predict Orochimaru's moves, I told him, and I was being truthful. Although, even he wasn't as accurate as I would have liked. I was very sure that the void had changed him in some way, but it was as close as I would get, I guessed. With a thought, I added another chair to the room. Now, my friends and pseudo-council. We still have to think what the real Orochimaru is trying to pull off here, I said, as I took my seat again. I decided to add Hakai to the little circle, triangle. 3 heads would be better than 2, I was sure. I would have to keep an eye on him though, just in case. Oh. A week passed since my interrogation of Kabuto and nobody was telling me anything. Although, if I was being fair, I didn't want them to tell me anything. I had done my part and they knew almost as much as I did now. There was very little I could do regarding the crush that they couldn't, and I had no delusions that they knew better than I what to do in such a situation. I might have studied and worked with similar stuff with Danza's assignments, but they had years upon years of experience to work with. Moreover, my analysis session with Hakai and Shade was so unproductive, paired with the stressful month and a half that I had had, that I really didn't want to continue beating my head against that particular wall. I would leave that to Hiruzen, Mai and Onaki. Instead, I focused on my own training, which was no less important, in my opinion. After so much study and research done for the Void Genjutsu to come to life, doing normal training and going back to my elemental jutsu creation project had been like a breath of fresh air. Even my conditioning to use the cursed seal was nice to do, now that I had already gotten somewhat used to it and I didn't need to force my brain to work through that. I had been very, very wrong to think that the physical training after using the mark would be worse than studying while using it. It sucked, yes, my muscles always felt stiff and my body reacted slower, but it was much better than trying to have a decent amount of brain power while my blood felt like it was boiling. Powering through the mark to spar or throw jutsu around was like a walk in the park in comparison. There was another nice side effect of coming back from creating Mortal Reminder and Wit's End though. This is almost easy, I amused as I worked through some things in my notebook. It was during a break in my training, after doing mark conditioning and jutsu practice and before sparring with Kat and Anko. Rolling my eyes at one of my past self's decisions, I scratched a bit of text and corrected it. Kid, do you know how many R&D people would pull their hair out hearing you say that about creating a jutsu? Anko asked, raising her eyebrows at me even as her lips curved up in an amused grin. I'm pretty sure there are already a few over there cursing your name because you don't want to share your... What did you call them? Void Genjutsu. I'm never sharing those and nobody can make me, I confirmed vehemently. I would never give such a thing to anybody, because I was sure that it would find its way into the hands of someone that would use it in a way that I didn't agree with. The void was something that was better left alone. I used it because I needed it, and as someone that had experienced it, I had the proper respect for the thing. I would be forever grateful to Hiruzen for saying that they were my property and I could share them with whoever I wanted. The only condition he had put on me was to use them if another case such as Kabuto's presented itself and Konoha needed to use it again. I was fine with that, I just didn't want any random ninja to get access to it, and since even the Scroll of Secrets wasn't secure enough, as evidenced by canon Naruto, that meant that I wouldn't share it with anybody. Anyway, Anko mumbled, rolling her eyes at me. The stubborn woman still wanted me to cast Mortal Reminder on her, but, at least, she wasn't crazy enough to ask for Wit's End. The first at least could be dispelled, which was the only difference between them, but boy was it a big one. I was almost glad that the thing wouldn't level up, since I refused to use it on any of my allies and didn't have anyone around that I hated enough to cast it on them. Yin Release, Wit's End LVL4. S-rank technique with which the user negates all the senses of their target. The jutsu cannot be dispelled for as long as the user supplies chakra to it. Hand Seal 17. Consumption 64 chakra points per second. Plus creator bonus. It was both a great and a terrifying technique, even with that cost. I could cast the thing for roughly 14 seconds normally, something that was extended to over a minute if I used the cursed mark, since that one had a lower consumption per second. Kabuto, a ninja trained to resist tortures like few were, had broken in just over 5 seconds of the thing, only needing a little push after that. I had gone way overboard using the mark in his interrogation. I was, admittedly, a little scared of my own technique, and I didn't even have to fear anyone using it on me, unless an Uchiha saw me. Note that down, don't use either of them when there's a chance an Uchiha will be around. Or Danza. God, I hope the bastard didn't somehow get a peek at me using the technique with his stolen Sharingan. I had almost forgotten about that. I sighed, leaning back against the tree and looking up at the sky. I'm tired, I thought, closing the notebook and putting it aside. Nice as it was to finally be done with the genjutsu, I still hadn't had more than a few hours at a time to rest. And rest was something that I desperately needed after so much work. I heard Shirakumo call me from the side. Soon, her voice was followed by the feeling of her legs climbing my arm. Everything okay? Yeah. I'm just tired. I'll take a moment to relax, I think I told her, closing my eyes and taking comfort in her touch. Something very weird, since she was a spider. However, she was a friend, and I knew that. She settled on my shoulder since I was leaning my head against the tree. HMPH, I told you not to overwork yourself, she chastised without much heat in her voice. It's not even that good a technique, the one you are working on, she voiced, and my lips twitched. None of the spider clan were overly fond of my idea, which was kind of understandable, but also amusing. I've already told you. I designed the thing before signing your contract, I replied, not for the first time, internally rolling my eyes. Besides, it'll be really cool. But why can't it be a spider? She whined petulantly. We are so much cooler, we have more legs, and more eyes, and we have poison and silk too. They are just, I chuckled lightly at that. They have their own good traits, you know. But yeah, spiders are awesome too, I admitted easily. It was the truth anyway, I had always found spiders to be kind of cool too. Of course we are, idiot. I could almost feel her preening at the praise, blatantly focusing on the second part of my statement. She called out, sounding much more serious, almost reminding me of her mother, actually. I want to continue training with genjutsu, she told me. Instead of answering, I cast intermediate mirage on her with my eyes closed. After all, I was touching her. I didn't need to see her. Any other moment I would have used advanced or greater mirage, to grind them a bit. However, this was a moment of rest, I had decided, and I didn't feel like opening my eyes and going through hand seals. If at all possible, I wanted to continue just doing nothing for a bit longer. Why did you have to make it like that? Shirakumo whined, but I felt her tensing up, as she always did when she tried to dispel a genjutsu. It was her weak point, apparently, and she struggled a lot with the illusion arts, both to use them and to counter them. I still found it strange how the Spider Clan went about using jutsu. After all, they didn't have hands like normal humans. And they couldn't use their legs as pseudo-hands like I had noted in my canon knowledge notebooks about the toads. Instead, it was like they went straight to the seamless use of the techniques, which sounded unfair, but it was countered by the fact that they had a much harder time getting started. Done. Shirakumo informed me, and her whole body lowered as her legs relaxed. Again. I asked softly and waited for a second. I'll take that as a no. No. Wait, I can do one more, she said stubbornly. She was determined, I had to give her that. You have a hard time with it. It's okay. You'll get there eventually, I reassured her before a grin spread over my face. I don't feel like it anyway. I'm resting right now, remember? Idiot was what she said. Her body, on the other hand, told me a completely different thing as she relaxed even more, basically lying on my shoulder. Even her voice came out tired and soft. Break's over, IG. Cat is here, Anko told me, sounding supremely amused at her interrupting my relaxation time. I felt my eyebrow twitch. If this is you messing me, Anko, I swear. She's not. I'm indeed here to train you, IG-kun. Cat interrupted me and I felt my eyebrow twitch again. You are 5 minutes early, I pointed out, annoyance starting to show in my voice. How can you even? Anko started, cut off by Cat explaining herself. I finished an assignment ahead of time and I thought I could. You know what, fine. I stood up, opening my eyes. Shirakumo, I said, looking at both my sensei and my Anbu Kenjutsu teacher. The small white spider replied with a curious yes, as a smirk started growing on my face. How would you like some training with your poison techniques? It would be nice, those are my favorites. She exclaimed, for once not acting like a tsund. She liked her poison jutsu so much that she didn't even sound tired anymore. IG. Both Anko and Cat asked, suddenly much less amused, or, at least, the former wasn't. How about a 2-on-2, huh? Sensei? I asked sweetly. I mean, it sounds like a good idea. But why are you so? I think I should train without my seals for once too, I continued, cracking my neck. You know, so that I don't get too used to them and all that. IG. Suddenly, she seemed to realize where I was going. I think you can continue your break for a few more minutes. Yeah, Cat and I will just go over there to chat for a. No. It's all right, Sensei. I insist. I unlatched new ivory from my back. Oh, fuck. The sound of lightning reached his ears as he looked at his student rush towards a rock and thrust his hand forward. The weaponized limb buried itself on the boulder and Kakashi took a moment to assess the situation. Sasuke, first of all, looked relatively fine. His breathing was ragged and his fingers were bleeding a little. However, overall, it was much better than how he had suffered at the beginning of their training. The destruction on his path had been minimal. The lightning had flashed and thundered a lot, but that was expected from someone that had only actually known the technique for less than a month. The way he had used it, it was more of a normal attack than an assassination technique, but that was fine. If he was honest, Kakashi wished his student would not take one of those missions for a while. He hadn't even wanted to teach the technique to the Uchiha, but with the threat that loomed over the village. Then he took in the actual damage Sasuke had done to the rock. It wasn't the best, but the thing had cracked and he had managed to bury the whole length of his fingers in the thing. Not a whole lot of process from how they had started, but he had focused more on reducing the damage his student received from his own attack than increasing what he delivered. Kakashi was pleasantly surprised when, once again, his student proved to have a much more stable mind, for lack of a better word, than what he had expected. When he had been told that the last loyal Uchiha would be in his team, he had dreaded it, almost wishing to send him to the Genin Corps like he had many others. After all, everyone knew what had happened to his clan, and there was no way that someone with that blood in their veins would not seek revenge. He had been right, but also wrong. The kid did want to kill his brother for what he had done to his own clan, but at least he wasn't absolutely consumed by that goal. There were theories about why that was, but Kakashi was just thankful that he didn't have to teach an unhinged avenger. "It's not enough, is it?" his student asked, looking at his own hand and flexing his bleeding fingers slowly. His expression twisted in a grimace before he turned his head towards Kakashi, who considered the question for a moment. "Enough for what?" he asked, with a lazy tilt of his head. Since the first day, the Jounin had received different answers for such questions. Most of the time the boy was referring to Itachi. Some others, it was Naruto, who seemed to have some weird friend-rivalry going on with the Uchiha. They were competitive, but not overly so. No, both of them seemed to have someone else in that spot. And that someone was the last answer. To beat Ig, Sasuke clarified. "No, it's not," Kakashi replied honestly, watching his student's reaction carefully. Months ago, he would have expected anger from such an answer, maybe some shouts, or at least a scowl. Instead, what he got was a deep breath in and a sigh as Sasuke turned his attention back to his training. "By the way, one more try and we are going to the hospital, so you have that hand checked. After that, you have a session with the Yamanaka." That earned him a frown. The Uchiha had, like many others, a dislike for having people in their mind. He did, at least, take the training he had to go through, which was a relief for Kakashi and many in the Shinobi Council. Having such an important rookie influenced by Orochimaru of all people was something nobody wanted to happen. "I won't catch up with either of them, will I?" his student asked, and, this time, Kakashi actually paused to consider the question. He knew who he meant now, at least. The problem was the actual question though. After all, it's difficult to tell. He started, earning himself the full attention of the last loyal Uchiha. Most geniuses slow down their progress with time. They get complacent, too confident in their talent. But neither of them is like that. Sasuke finished for him. True, but that doesn't mean they can train as much as they would need to keep growing. That sentence eased the scowl on his student's face. Take Itachi, for example. The frown returned with the name, something that Kakashi was used to, by now. He is out there in the world, probably traveling to keep out of the village's eyes while also having to work for a living. I'm sure you can guess how. Sasuke gave a slow nod. That kind of life doesn't give one a lot of time to train. The sensei kept on. He wasn't being entirely truthful, really. Missing ninja could find their own little safe havens to not live permanently on the run. It wasn't like the villages could see everywhere. Sata, however, has the perfect circumstances going for him. He has a teacher, he has talent, he has the drive, and he has the time to train. Not really the truth either, since Kakashi was privy of Ige's little side mission during the 2 months between the preliminaries and the finals. He couldn't tell Sasuke that though. Besides, he guessed that it passed as training too. I see. Not for the first time, Kakashi found himself unable to read anything on his student's face. After a moment, the boy looked at both of his hands, once more flexing his fingers slowly. One more try, right? He asked out of nowhere. Yes, Kakashi nodded, side-eyeing the Uchiha. Something in your mind? I have some more time before the finals, the boy mumbled as he walked towards a good enough place to start the technique again. I have an idea I want to try out. Kakashi rolled his eye at the non-answer. Oh. Jiraiya. The Toad Sage looked at his student as the blonde snickered and continued scribbling something in his scroll. He hadn't expected the son of his student to be so good at seals, but with those parents, he guessed he should have. Many people were skeptical of Fuinjutsu being a hereditary talent, but it was a difficult thing to defend when every single Uzumaki had had a knack for it. He took advantage of his student's distraction to remember the absolute disaster that had been his attempt at getting Naruto to use the Kyuubi's chakra. Jiraiya had expected it to be a struggle, both because it was something that would be hard and because anything involving the Nine Tails would set people on edge, never mind the kid that actually contained the thing. In hindsight, he probably should have expected the wariness that the exercise had earned him from Naruto. However, the kid needed to learn how to use that power, just like the Jinchuriki in Kumo had. Especially if the rumors he had been hearing as of late from his spy network were true. Rumors that had been all but confirmed by the other brat, Ig Sata, who had received some information from the shard of Orochimaru left in the mark. A scary kid, that one, to be able to turn something that was called literally a curse and make it be almost a blessing. Not even happy with that, the brat had even managed to get information from the shard that Jiraiya's ex-teammate had left in the seal. Never mind some of the things he had heard around and from his own student. His student. Jiraiya's eyes found Naruto once more. Shaking his head, he sighed. He really needed to stop thinking about that. Instead, he focused on the kid's training. Initially, he had thought about teaching the blonde the Rasengan after having him sign the Toad contract. It felt like a good way to give him some of the legacy that was rightfully his anyway. With how much Naruto leaned towards seals though, he was starting to change his mind. After all, Minato had been widely known for two techniques, one of which was a Fuinjutsu one. It was a shame that he had taken the secret to the Flying Thunder God with him, but the sage was reasonably sure that Naruto would crack the technique eventually. He didn't know why he was so, but he had a feeling that it would happen. After all, he had taken a look at the seals the blonde had created himself. They were very basic, yes, but they were also equally as effective for that. A barrier that was as resistant as he wanted it to be so long as he poured an insane amount of chakra inside it, which he could afford, and an illusion not unlike the clone jutsu, but that could only act in a previously set behavior. Jiraiya smirked, remembering the reasons the blonde had given for why he had made them. They were great techniques, but to think one was done to prank his teammate and the second because he had always been unable to make the stupid-ass clone as he called it. Petty, childish reasons, but they also gave the sage a peek into how to get the blonde's mind working. He was sure that the kid would master the Hiraishin if only to prove that he was better than everyone else in the village that couldn't do so. After all, it would be a great way to get back at the people that had spent his whole life ignoring and shunning him. The smirk vanished from Jiraiya's face as the thought crossed his mind. Not for the first time, he hated how much his job forced him to be away from the village. It wasn't like he had any duties regarding Naruto's well-being, he had only been the one to give him his name, that was supposed to be it. However, he had been Minato's sensei, they had been even closer than what a normal teacher and student would be. It felt like an insult to the man's memory, that he had ignored his son for so long. "I think I did it," Naruto shouted in that boisterous voice of his that was both annoying and endearing. His hands held up a piece of paper with an intricate seal array drawn on it. Jiraiya blinked, his brain trying to decipher what the thing was supposed to do even when he knew he would have to sit down and analyze the whole thing to do so. "And what's that supposed to do, huh?" he asked after a moment, earning a wide grin from the boy. This and, instead of speaking further, Naruto set the paper down on the ground and jumped back. Jiraiya blinked at the sudden action, too caught up in his previous thoughts to actually process what was happening until it was too late. The seal activated in the area surrounding it, which obviously had him inside. His eyes caught the small dirt cloud that the kid had kicked up in his rush. The stuff almost vanished as it fell straight to the ground in a second. In that same moment, Jiraiya felt a weight being placed on his shoulders, his whole body really. It pushed him to the ground, but his legs didn't give up. Instead, his whole body tensed as he resisted the force. It wasn't enough to restrain him, but he would give the kid credit where credit was due. The seal would have sent a Haichuan straight to the ground. Hell, it would have probably done so to some Takubetsu Jounin too. Dispel this thing before I throw you off another cliff, brat, Jiraiya grumbled, giving the blonde his best glare. The brat had the gall to grin at him and laugh. Oh, he would make him pay for that. Oh. Yoshino Nara. A few years prior, Yoshino would have never believed the sight before her. Actually, she still had trouble accepting that it was really happening. Shocking as the sight was, however, it was just as welcome. After all, her son was training. She had expected laziness when she married into the Nara family. One just didn't date someone from the clan having a problem with it, that was just stupid. However, her problem came from the fact that her son was neglecting his training, his few years of preparation before going out into a world that would happily see him dead. That she had a problem with. She had tried so much to curb that attitude the smallest bit. Just a little would have been enough. If her son wanted to be a loner that lied on the ground cloud watching, she was fine with it. If her son wanted to sleep twice as much as a normal person, she was fine with that too. What she wasn't fine with was her son not being prepared for the dangers of the world. However, it seemed that even with all her determination and even Shikaku's, both had still coddled their son. They had wanted him to train, but to not see the ugly side of the world in the meantime, and that had worked against them. Without a real reason, brought right to his face, Shikamaru would have never taken their and his teacher's lessons. That's where Ijisato came, honest to the extreme as he explained to her son his fears of the real world. Telling Shikamaru of his commendable determination to protect those he cared about. Laying all his reasons plain for her son to see and understand. Shikaku and Yoshino would be forever grateful for the Satter's words. From that day, Shikamaru became everything that Yoshino wished he would. She was so proud she sometimes had to stop herself from squishing her little boy with all her strength. Retired as she was, she might still have broken a rib or two. From then on, her nagging was done mostly out of routine, which both her son and her husband seemed to notice. This had the amusing effect of actually getting them to be a little less lazy. Honestly, the Nara, as smart as they were, made no sense at all. I wouldn't have them any other way though, Yoshino thought as she looked at her husband training their son. It wasn't nearly as hard as anyone else would have had it, but no one could train like a Nara, of that she was sure. After all, while they might not have the most physically demanding routines, they more than made up for it with how much they trained their minds. In the end, if anyone asked Yoshino, the Nara actually trained more than most people. It was just that they focused on things that most others overlooked or simply trained separately. Not the Nara though, no, they trained their bodies and their minds at the same time. Like right at that moment, for example. Shikaku was having light spars with Shikamaru while also asking, demanding, more like, for answers to several questions that were shot mid-fight. Questions that ranged from battle strategies, to science, to medicine, to politics. Her son had to do both things, fight and think, while also. Her hand snapped a kunai in Shikamaru's direction, something that he almost didn't manage to dodge in time. Yoshino saw her son's hand twitch. He probably really wished he could take his thinking pose. He had to learn, however, that one didn't always have time to just sit down to think. Sometimes one had to make plans on the fly. I think that's enough for now, Shikaku announced, instantly snapping from serious to lazy. Yoshino almost rolled her eyes as her husband raised a hand to his mouth to cover a yawn. If she didn't know better, she would have thought that it was an act to exaggerate that trait of theirs, but they were actually like that, surprisingly enough. Speaking of surprises, Shikamaru was frowning, she noticed curiously. "Everything okay, Shika?" she asked, when he didn't say anything for a few seconds. Her son turned to her and his scowl melted into an expression that hung between frustrated and resigned. "I want to continue training, can we?" he asked, making both Shikaku and herself freeze. While she found her son's more driven attitude very relieving, this was another thing altogether. This was bordering on hard work. Yoshino would be the first to celebrate if Shikamaru decided to be like that, but still, there had to be a reason for that, and that's what concerned her. "Why?" Shikaku questioned, eyes narrowed even while his tone remained lackadaisical. "We could go for a nap, you know." Her husband all but whined. "Something is happening," Shikamaru almost accused them. Yoshino saw Shikaku tense up at those words and curse under his breath. Apparently, their son had noticed, but she wasn't really surprised. "I saw IG the other day," her son continued, and she focused on what he was saying. "He looked dead on his feet, and while his training is insane like that, he also looked stressed. He's never stressed when just training. He even looked like he had skipped a few nights' sleep. He's overworking for the finals." "That's actually good for you," Shikaku shrugged. Evidently, his excuse didn't work because Shikamaru continued undeterred. "You've been sleeping less too." "You never do that," he accused then, and Yoshino saw her husband's shoulders sag. "I know you aren't going out to hang out with Inoichi and Kauza for fun. You always come back with the same look you do after council meetings." "Yes, something is happening," Shikaku admitted, and she knew that's all he would say on the matter. Evidently, he had decided that there was no point in trying to save the lie. "So, can we continue training?" her son asked, almost smirking. "Is he threatening us with more prodding to train him?" Yoshino had to wonder, and she wasn't sure if she should be proud or not for that. "What a drag," Shikaku grumbled as he dragged his feet back in front of their son. Ultimately, Yoshino was just happy that her son would be more prepared. "Oh. Inoichi Yamanaka." Tension was always present at work those days for Inoichi. Which is why he was so glad to have some semblance of peace at home, even if that was somewhat ruined by his daughter asking for training. Don't get him wrong, he had been a very happy man when Ino started asking for it. There were many, many horror stories that were more than true about how the real world treated some kunoichi. At that moment though, the last thing he wanted was to be reminded that his own daughter would be right there in the middle of what could be an absolute disaster for having passed to the finals in the Chuunin exams. Inoichi had never thought that he would be annoyed by his daughter being a good ninja, but that was the case now, apparently. Still, spending time training with Ino was much better than being at work, where everyone and their mothers were growing more and more paranoid by the second. It was with good reason, but still. They were all doing as much as they could, feeding each other's fears wouldn't help with that. Well, I'm glad you decided to focus back on our clan's jutsu, Inoichi told his daughter. Poisons won't help you with your first opponent in the finals. After all, we know that he uses them too. Yeah, makeup-wearing freak poisoned Chaoji Ino grumbled, which the father found somewhat adorable. Despite the name-calling, Inoichi found himself proud that his daughter acted so protective of the son of one of his best friends. For a while, he had been worried that her generation of the Ino Shikacho wouldn't be as close as his. His puppet will be a problem though, she pointed out with a frown. I can't poison or affect something that doesn't have a real body or mind. That's a bit of a counter for us, yes, Inoichi nodded, agreeing with her point. But you can affect the puppeteer himself. So, much like you did against the Kiranin, you could defend his attempts with his puppet while attacking him. I don't think I'll have enough time to get the constant version of this jutsu though, she commented as she slumped down. We are sure that I can't use the puppet switch cursed seal with his glorified toy. Inoichi had to stop himself from flinching at the cursed seal part. Not only because of what he knew of the damned thing that shared that name, which would be enough for some others, but also because of what was now associated with it in his mind. The void, as IG liked to call it. That hell didn't ever get easier to deal with as time passed, if anything, it grew worse. The Yamanaka clan had almost pitied Kabuto Yakushi for what he had to go through. At least, when he visited, he still retained some of his senses courtesy of the boy, who was only showing him the place and not actually putting him through it. Inoichi was also very glad that the satyr had refused to share his new genjutsu. Maybe it was wrong for him to think that, what with him working for the T&I force, but even he thought that the torture technique was too much. Better to share it as little as possible. It had accomplished its purpose and more already, anyway. The thing hadn't only gotten the spy to talk, but it had also clearly spooked the Mitsukage and the Sushikage. Understandable, Inoichi thought. It wasn't every day that you saw someone break a person so clearly trained against torture and other forms of intelligence extraction. In less than a minute. Dad. Ino broke him from his musings and he blinked for a second before sighing. We've been over this, Inoichi patiently replied. You would have to put a seal on that puppet and cast the jutsu on it. By the time you do that, he will have attacked you already. He won't just stand by while you do your thing. I know, it's just. She groaned. These exams are supposed to be about showing off, aren't they? And all I'm doing is stuff that nobody can see. First the invisible poison cloud and now a jutsu that only my target can even know it's happening. The father sighed again. The worst part was that she wasn't even wrong. On the other hand, she was missing the other, much more important part of it too. I'm not the flashiest of ninjas either, and I'm still a jounin, aren't I? Yes, but you can take control of anyone, his daughter praised, and while it wasn't the answer he wanted, it still made him very proud. That's cool, but this. She gestured unintelligently as she struggled to get her point across. This just isn't. Believe me, what you are training with and what you already know is enough to do well in the exams. Show as it might be, the judges won't care about how flashy the participants are, Inoichi reassured calmly. You sure? She asked, eyes narrowed. I am, he nodded. Now, back to training, young lady. You still need much of it to start using this jutsu without seals, the father pointed out, much to his daughter's dismay. Fit in. She all but whined, getting ready to cast it again. Inoichi, meanwhile, got ready to be the target of the practice. That's its guy for now. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching.